The Ruby Life Pool's Mythic Plus Guide. Very quickly going to describe how this guide is set up. The video is split into chapters for each boss. You can find them down below. The first chapter will describe the trash on the way to the boss, focusing on important abilities and target priority. The second chapter covers the boss mechanics and their abilities. And the third chapter will be role-specific duties. The very end of this video is a sped up video of a standard dungeon route from start to finish so that you can see the complete layout of the dungeon. Let's go! Melidrussa's Trash. The caster here is your top priority, as they will cast an ice shield around another mob. The ice shield needs to be interrupted, however if it is placed on an enemy it should be dispelled or purged. The Primal Juggernaut is the next priority. Watch your feet as it will create rings that will deal damage. Tanks, be aware it has a Tank Buster Crushing Smash, which deals heavy physical damage.
Next is a Dwarf. They cast Tectonic Slam. This deals damage to the whole party and can be interrupted with a hard CC.
The last mob before the boss is a big Drakthir. He has a frontal charge attack called Blazing Rush. Make sure you are out of his way. Tanks, be aware his Steel Barrage hits hard and fast over 3 seconds. While navigating through the dungeon, stay away from the eggs in the pools. If a player or an enemy steps on them, they will hatch. Once hatched, these whelps will deal frost damage, and they add a stacking frost debuff with every melee hit. Melidrussa. Hail bombs will target every player and mark the ground where they stand. Move away from these as they will explode upon impact. Once landing, they remain on the ground and will deal burst damage to that player. Chill Storm will target one player, and that player needs to move away from the party. Once it detonates, the player has a brief period to escape the ring or they will take massive damage. This will persist for 6 seconds and deal damage to all players until it explodes. Once it explodes, it will push all players backwards from its detonation location. So watch where you're standing so you don't get knocked into any of the hail bombs. At 75 and 45% HP, she will spawn a bunch of whelps. These do auto attacks and apply a stacking frost debuff. Burn them down ASAP. This frost debuff is dispellable, so once they are defeated, make sure you're cleansing your tank. After the whelps are dead, focus on Melidrussa as she pulses party damage until her shield is destroyed. Rinse and repeat. Role specific duties. Tanks. Keep Melidrussa as close to the center as you can, but away from the hail bombs. Grab the whelps and keep them on top of Melidrussa for extra cleave damage. Healers. Chill Storm deals consistent party damage, and once it explodes, deals a burst of damage. During the whelp summoning, the party takes damage every 2 seconds until her shield is destroyed. DPS. Run away from the boss if you're targeted with Chill Storm, and use a defensive once it is placed on the ground. Cleave the whelps, and use offensive cooldowns for breaking the boss's shield as quickly as possible. Blazehoof's Trash. The caster Cinderweaver is the top priority to kill. They will cast Cinderbolt, which is interruptible, and also buff themselves with Burning Ambition. This increases their haste and damage taken. Next is the caster Flame Dancer. They will use Flame Dance, which deals damage to everyone. This is the top priority for interrupts. Right before they die, they shield themselves and launch a volley of fire attacks marked by swirlies on the ground. Avoid these. Their shield is purgeable and will end their attack, otherwise it lasts for about 8 seconds. The final mob is the Fire Elemental. They use Living Bomb, which puts a ring around a player. Once this expires, this deals damage and knocks the players upwards into the air. Use a defensive cooldown if you're targeted. The player targeted can put the ring on the enemy mobs, and it will damage and interrupt them as well. Just watch out for your friendlies. They also use Inferno, which deals damage to every player, and once dead, they cast Burnout, which deals fatal damage to anyone caught inside the circle when it expires. There are 2 mini-bosses here as well. Thunderhead will use Storm Breath, which is fatal, so never stand in front of him. He also puts a lightning debuff on players that deals damage every second and then explodes damage to all party members after 8 seconds. Healers should dispel at least one of these to help spread out the damage. He also has a tank buster called Thunderjaws, which will knock the tank backwards. The other mini-boss is Flame Gullet. He has a Flame Breath, which is fatal, so stay away from his mouth. Once at 50%, he places a Molten Blood debuff on all party members. This deals damage every 2 seconds and stacks. Use offensive cooldowns to burn him quickly after 50%. His tank buster is Fire Maw, and this deals big fire damage and applies a dot that lasts for 10 seconds. Blazehoof. You will rotate the boss around the circle as the ground will continuously be covered by fire with each attack. Decide with the party if you're going clockwise or counterclockwise. The tank should always keep the boss facing to the north, and the rest of the party should be stacked and to the south. Molten Boulder is cast in front of him. This is a large rock that rolls in a straight line, leaving fire on the ground. The tank should be aiming this towards the outside of the arena. At 100 energy, he will target a random player, and in that location, he will spawn a Fire Elemental. The boss should be moved to the Fire Elemental for cleave damage, but the Fire Elemental is top priority. Its attack, Roaring Blaze, should be interrupted as much as possible as it deals fire damage to all party members with each cast. Once dead, it will use Burnout, which will deal fatal damage to anyone inside the circle when it explodes. This also leaves fire on the ground. Searing Blows is the tank buster and hits hard 4 times in 3 seconds and applies a dot. Continue to rotate the boss away from the fire. Role specific duties. Tanks. Keep the boss facing towards the outside of the arena, move the boss close to the elemental for cleave damage, and utilize a cooldown for Searing Blows. Healers. Expect party-wide damage once the elemental spawns. Damage will greatly ramp if it is not being interrupted. DPS. Stay stacked behind the boss. The elemental is top priority and should be interrupted whenever possible. Erkhart's Trash. Flame Channelers are the highest priority. Flash Fire needs to be interrupted every time. It deals heavy damage and heals the caster. Tempest Channeler is next. Use a defensive cooldown when they channel Lightning Storm. The Thunderclouds that spawn have a shield and once depleted will charge a player and begin detonating, so watch out for them. The last mob is the Warrior. Melee, just watch out for their Thunderclap as it will slow you. Erkhart and Kyrakka. This is a 2-phase boss battle with 2 bosses. Kyrakka is the Drake and Erkhart is the Humanoid. Phase 1 is primarily against Erkhart, while Kyrakka flies around. Kyrakka does use abilities while flying and will also land for a breath attack. Once one of the bosses reaches 50% HP, Phase 2 will begin. Kyrakka will land, and Erkhart will mount them, finishing the fight on the ground together. The boss's abilities remain the same for both phases. Kyrakka is the most dangerous of the 2, and the party should focus all their big damage when it lands. If your party is ranged heavy, take advantage of this and burn down Kyrakka while it flies around. Everyone needs to make sure they are watching their feet, as stepping in fire here is going to quickly overwhelm your healer, and finally stay away from the edges as you can get blown off. Kyrakka's main ability is applying a debuff called Inferno Core. This stacks and deals damage every half second for 4 seconds. Once it falls off or it's dispelled, it explodes, dealing damage to the player and dropping fire on the ground. The amount of fire puddles that appears depends on how many stacks of Inferno Core the player has. You obtain Inferno Core by getting hit by Kyrakka's Fire Breath or Flame Spit ability. Fire Breath is easily avoidable and Flame Spit is unavoidable and randomly targets a couple players. Touching any fire pools will also add an additional stack of Inferno Core. Erkhart has a few abilities. Cloud Burst will damage all players and will silence any caster, so make sure you stop casting before this goes off. Storm Slam is his tank buster and stacks, so use defensive cooldowns appropriately. Winds of Change will blow players and fire pools in a specific direction. Make sure you aren't standing close to the edge and avoid the fire pools as they move. Role specific duties. Tanks. Positioning is the most important here. Keep Erkhart near the middle areas, watch for fire breath and fire pools. Be aware of the tank buster stacking and utilize cooldowns appropriately. Healers. Expect consistent party damage. Dispel the tank if he reaches 2 stacks of Storm Slam. Inferno Core deals some heavy quick damage. The difficulty here is all dependent on your other party members' abilities at avoiding the fire. DPS. Avoid the fire. Focus as much damage onto Kyrakka as possible. Use a defensive cooldown if you're hit with Inferno Core. That's it for the Ruby Life pools. The remaining part of this video is a super fast clear so you can see a generic dungeon route and the pathing. Shout out to these channel members. If this video helped, then press the thumbs up. Subscribe if you enjoy WoW content. I have plenty of guides, tips, tricks, podcasts, and more. Plus, I'm doing the rest of the Mythic Plus dungeons in this rotation. You can show extra support by becoming a channel member. It's 99 cents a month and gives you early ad-free access to all of my videos. I'll see you in the next one.